Question. Okay, so this is what everybody's thinking. The people who didn't watch the documentary and that they're wondering. Brett Favre sends her a picture of his ween. He's making it. Why didn't you take that at the time? Was it out of fear or was it out of not wanting to deal with the situation? We had TMZ at the time. We had obviously Deadspin. We had a bunch of those websites that were able to make you a lot of money if you wanted to do that. Why did you choose not to go that route?
For lack of a better answer, it's not my character.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like, it's
Yeah,
just not. I don't want my. I don't like. I was so. I was in such a bad place when the season ended with the Jets that honestly I was like, well, I look this way, so I must have done something to bring this upon myself. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Because it's like, well, she was dressed that way. What did she expect? And so people are like, where's her accountability in all this? And it's like, no, trust me. I spent a lot of years examining my accountability in this situation and like times that I put myself in scenarios based on how, but like people don't realize that's what was rewarded at the time in society. Like, you know what I mean? Where
But when you
that's
circle
you
back
remember
to
the
it,
shock jock era? You know
yeah.
what I mean? Like that's what sold.
When you circle back to it in your own head, you never even met the guy. So where
Yeah.
do you can't have much you can't hold yourself very accountable because you didn't lead him on. You didn't do anything to make him think that what he did was okay.
But also, I could
No.
see where she would think that people would be like, "Oh, she's a problem."
Oh,
That's
yeah.
a stigma. You know what I mean? Like they blame her regardless
Yeah.
of whether she had nothing to
Oh,
do with
I
the
thought
guy.
for sure in the
said-
beginning that you guys were probably banging, and I didn't know you at the time. I didn't know you at all. And he's Brett Favre, and you're hot, and I don't know. I just assumed that they had something going on. That's why you had pictures of his privates. And
No.
now, but let's clarify for the people who didn't see the documentary and don't know, you did not do this. You were friends with the guy who ran Deadspin, and he was a confidant. You had explained to him what was going on, and he took it against you. He calls himself in the documentary a scumbag for betraying you. He said the two scumbags in this situation are him and Brett Favre because you
Yeah.
didn't do it. You didn't bring everything to him and say, "Hey, let's go make money off of this." He betrayed you.
Yeah, and that's like one of the key points I want people to take away. One, I never met him, and two, like I didn't put this out there into the world, you
Yeah.
know. And this is pre Me Too,
Right.
you know. So this is pre women coming out and telling their stories because all the stories during Me Too were handled by women, you
Yeah.
know. And my situation was put out there by a guy who honestly he kind of talks about it in some podcasts that I've done with him since, and it's he's like, I just got tired of seeing this guy treated like a god when I knew what a scumbag he was. And so once he had my story, he was like, especially when this is during the time when Favre kept going back and forth about whether or not he was going to retire and
Right.
like holding the media hostage.
Yeah.
And AJ was just like, screw this guy. And
Yeah.
so unfortunately, I was just collateral damage, for lack of a better word, you know?
Yeah, it's it's a shame, but it did get the story out there, and it did explain. I mean, this documentary is not about him sending you wiener pictures. It's about what a bad person he is. I mean, the didn't even get into the scandal about him taking the money from the city, and there's a whole bunch of things in there. And yes, him holding the NFL fans hostage and betraying the Green Bay fans by going. I mean, some of that's sports, but some of that's just being a scumbag.
Yeah, and I think I walked away from at least my second watch of it. The first watch, Netflix came over and watched it with me, and I just kind of checked out
Yeah.
because I forget how hard that time in my life was, and it was so easy. It's so easy to put myself back there mentally, so I have to be very careful. And I did a ton of therapy and worked with a coach before I did the documentary because I wanted to make sure I wasn't causing myself harm
Yeah.
in doing this, you know, because like this is Untold was probably the 10th person or production company to bring me a documentary like this.
Right.
Their pitch was the only one that made sense to me. And they assured me that my story, while it was being told as part of his, it wouldn't just be to service his story. You know what I mean? Because every
Yeah.
time I've told my story previously, it was to be a part of some journalist angle. And so the parts of my story that fit that angle would be the parts that would be used. And Rebecca, the director of the documentary, was like, no, like I want to make sure I do as much justice to Jenn's story as possible, you know? So,
well, I think that's good because there are also, critics will come out and say, "Oh, why is she waiting until now to talk about this?" You didn't. You've been talking about it since it broke, and you didn't go and say, "Hey, I want to make a documentary about this." Somebody has made a documentary about what a bad person Brett Favre is, and this is part of that story. And I think it's important people know that.
And people have been trying to do this, honestly, since the Mississippi scandal broke in, 2020. People have been asking me since 2020 to do this documentary, and it finally happened last year. Like spring of last year was when they finally like convinced me, you know? So it took a while because I was just like, I'm happy. I've gotten into comedy.
Yeah.
I'm doing well with comedy.
Yeah.
I don't need this in my life anymore. But honestly, it felt like I couldn't touch it on stage, like doing comedy. Like
Right.
I couldn't approach it until I had done the work on myself to be able to talk about it in a way that didn't harm me. Because for a while, every time someone asked me to talk about it, it just felt like I was like publicly slitting my wrist. I was like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
You know?
Also, it doesn't define you. You're not
No.
defined by that. So, and I think that
I'm not
makes the most
defined by
sense.
someone else's terrible actions.
Yeah.
Like, why should that be the headline in my Wikipedia?
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
That's the truth, man. Or somebody else's unflattering picture also. We're talking to Jenn Sterger. Now you get into comedy. What is, I mean, that's ballsy as it is. You're like, all right, I'm going to, here I am going through some stuff. Now I'm going to stand on stage in front of people and be judged for the rest of my life.
But I wasn't talking about this,
Yeah.
you know? I was talking about myself and everything else and my opinions on things. And I don't know. I've always just been a super irreverent person, and it's gotten me in trouble more times than I can count when I worked in sports. Like, I worked for Larry King for a little bit when I first got out to LA, and I had to cover the Miami Dolphins bullying scandal, if you remember that.
Sure.
And again, it was like the only other time someone's gotten me up this early. I had to be into the office at like 6 a.m. to do these like hits for Larry King. And that day was I was covering the Jonathan Martin stuff, and I was just like, this is the biggest controversy to hit the Dolphins since the disappearance of Snowflake. And I said it straight down the barrel of the camera.
And he probably had no idea what you were talking about.
And the only person that like was even paying attention to me in this room was the camera guy who poked his head out and was like, did she just this smart ass? And then I get a note from my producer later that was like, did you drop an Ace Ventura reference at 6 a.m.?
That's hilarious.
He was like, take your job seriously, Jen. I was like, you hired the wrong person. Like, that's who I've always been.
Yeah.
I would get in trouble all the time when I worked in sports. Like I mean, the Jets honestly is the only place where I was like, oh, this makes sense, because this is the only place you can hand a girl with Asperger's a live microphone and no one's going to notice, you know? New Jersey.
Who are the first comics to take you seriously? I know Bert brought you through. Brad Williams was here when you were here. Who are the first, like, is, you know, right away you're like, okay, she thinks she's going to be funny now because she's pretty and she's got a little fame. And then and comics don't like that. I mean, like you said, what Ari said before, it's what we say about everybody who decides to do a podcast. Oh, you're just going to go buy equipment at Radio Shack and do a radio show now. But I mean, the truth is that you waltzed right in and you did it.
I mean, I fought for it.
Yeah.
You know, I fought for it for sure. And I think I had to fight to be taken more seriously by, I had to fight to be taken more seriously by audiences than I did comics.
Yeah.
You know, I think comics respected because they were seeing me grind. They were seeing me get on stage. And, you know, I did things like roast battle here on the comedy scene in LA, you know. So I was in front of, you know, Jeff Ross and all those guys and Tony Hinchcliffe. I've done roast with Tony. And one of the first roasts I did with Tony was we were actually dressed as pro wrestlers, like dead pro wrestlers. I was Miss Elizabeth, and he was Ultimate Warrior. No, he was Macho Man, and after I was done doing my set, he went to go roast me as if he had pre-written a joke that basically was like, she wasn't that good. But the problem is I had killed. And even Tony had to admit in the moment, he goes, she wasn't supposed to be this good at this.
That's a great feeling when you get that from other comics.
Yeah, especially someone that's, at the top of the roast game. Regardless of how you feel about his comedy. It's in terms of the roast world, like he's the top of the hill with Jeff,
So do you tour around the country? Do you mostly stay in LA, or what are you doing now? Because we haven't seen you here in a while.
I tour quite a bit. I did a lot during the fall. Like in the fall, I was on 3 tours simultaneously, which was probably poor scheduling on my part. Like I was beat when December came around, but I plan on being back in Tampa probably late this fall to run my hour, and I am talking about this on stage. Probably in a way that people don't expect, because it's more told in retrospect and like the bigger themes that we can all relate to. It's not like it's not about him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not about him. It's not about all the events of what happened. That's what the documentary is for. This is about how I've processed those events and the meaning that I've made out of them and how I've come out the other side of it,
Good. Well,
so I hope I get to come back to to Tampa to do my hour, like I said, in November, December. So I'd love it if people could stay in touch, and on my Instagram or whatever, you can sign up for my mailing list and you get alerts whenever I come back to the area.
Good. Well, I'm glad things worked out for you. I remember, it's so funny how things come for full circle. The first time we met was 2005, 2006, maybe 2005. You're blowing up at FSU. I'm seeing you in the news, and Gio is friends with you. And I don't even really know Gio that well. And Gio was able to get you to come on the show while we were doing mornings. And I remember my big idea was to get you to take a shirt and cut up the shirt like you cut it up for the games and made it all sexy and all that. And then, over the years, we've stayed in touch, and I've watched your career, and, you take this fame and you get this 15 minutes that everybody gets, and then it's what you do with it, and you're certainly taking it and running with it. So I'm happy for you. I'm glad the documentary came out. I hope it helps you out, at least helps you feel better about the situation and lets people know what really went down.
Yeah, and I hope that it just helps me close this chapter for everybody, because I think one of the hardest parts of it is, even when you moved on from something, it's like, imagine if every time you've moved on, someone has to like throw in your face like the dumbest thing you've ever done, or like the thing that's caused you the most shame in your life.
Right.
And it's like, I hope now that the facts are out there, we can collectively move on and like acknowledge the situation for what it is. I'm really kind of bummed that I haven't heard more from people in the sports industry, like, no sorry, no nothing, like, hey, we railroaded you. Like, people don't realize, like, for the last 10 years, I've been teaching sports media classes, like, especially in the state of Florida, like at Florida State, University of Florida. I've been teaching journalism classes there and being like, hey, this is what actual sports media is. And kind of being a cautionary tale of what happens when you burn a source.
Would you take one of those jobs now still? Would you take a McAfee type job, or if Barstool offered you something, are you still interested in doing something like that? Sports-wise?
I think a McAfee type job for sure.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But like, he's kind of carved out his own niche that like feels fun.
Yeah.
And like I said, like I think sports always have taken themselves too seriously. If it was something that was more of a hybrid job versus like a hardcore analyst job, I'm all for it. I've always been more about like sports entertainment, which is how I ended up with wrestling sometimes,
Yeah.
So yeah, like the McAfee type jobs, yes. But in terms of like, would I ever want to work in sideline reporting? Absolutely not.
No.
I think it's got such a low glass ceiling that like women just cannot break through. And I love that I'm able to use my voice to do something so much bigger than that, than just breaking down injuries on a sideline.
It's funny you say that, because in the documentary you say you wanted to be I don't remember who you said, Leslie Visser or
Susie Colbert and Aaron Andrews.
Aaron Andrews is the only one to really break out of that and do. I mean, the rest of them, that's all they did was that sideline. No matter how popular they got and how big, Aaron Andrews is really the first one to break out of it and do more than that. Yeah. So
it's because you're not allowed to show any kind of personality, you know, and you're just there to, and the same thing goes for pro wrestling backstage stuff. You know what I mean? It's such a limited niche thing, but with comedy, it's like, I have complete control over everything I say when I get on that stage.
Good.
Like, it is it is up to me, once I have that microphone in my hand. And I love the opportunity that is open for me. And I love the fact that I teach classes out here in LA, and I help other women learn how to navigate the business out here, because I want women to have a better experience than I did when I was coming up. I was very lucky that I had guys like Bert Kreischer and Brad Williams and Chris Porter that took me under their wing and like showed me how to tour and showed me how to be like a comics comic. You know what I mean? Because I think I very easily could have fallen into that influencer comic thing.
Right. You don't want that.
No, I wanted to be taken seriously and respected by my peers, because that's something I never had in sports.
Yeah. Well, listen, I know how every day how bad it sucks to get up early and have to talk on the radio. So I thank you so much for getting up and joining us and staying in touch with us over the years. And let me know when you come to town. We'd love to have you on the show when you're in studio in November or whenever you come down.
I love that, man. I'd love to get on the radio and not talk about private parts for one time.
I figure we'll talk about somebody else's private parts by that time. You never know. The documentary is called The Fall of Favre. It is on Netflix. It's an easy watch. It's actually a good documentary, even though it's a bad story. So, and Jenn Sterger, we thank you for coming on the show, Punkin.